Thank you all for joining us this evening. Welcome to the final virtual speaker series of 2021. You are here with the Birthplace of Country Music Museum's curatorial team as we explore the connections between music and work inspired by our current Smithsonian special exhibit, The Way We Worked. Before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. Please stay muted with your video off throughout the program. That helps it run a bit smoother, usually, at least. And we will be sending out a survey within a couple of days of tonight's program. Probably try to do that tomorrow. Please share your feedback with us. We value that, and it really helps us with future planning. We will share, I'm also going to share 3 Spotify playlists related to this presentation via the chat, and I'll also send the links to those with the survey. If I forget to do that, don't hesitate to reply and let me know that I forgot. And if you have any work-related songs you want to share with the group, please drop those in the chat as well. And lastly, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end of our presentations. So please put any questions or thoughts you have in the Zoom chat, and we'll address those at the end. And thank you. And I'll turn it over to Renee now.
So hello, everyone. Like Scotty said, welcome to our final virtual speaker series of the year. Some quick introductions. You were just listening to Scotty Almany. He is our digital media programming and exhibit logistics manager. So he has lots of jobs, all of which require different music, I'm sure. And then Erica Barker is our curatorial manager. And then I am the head curator here at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum, and we are going to be your presenters tonight. So thank you very much for being here with us. So as Scotty mentioned, tonight we are talking about the relationships between music and work. And this program came about due to our current special exhibit, The Way We Worked, which is here at the museum through January 23rd. And it came to us from the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. The exhibit traces the history of work in America over the last 150 years, from who does the work, where the work takes place, how that work has changed over time, and why we work. And music, if you look back, music and work have always gone hand in hand. Songwriters often use their craft to reflect the realities of day-to-day life. And for most of us, a big piece of our lives is given over to the time we spend doing our jobs. And therefore, it's really no surprise to find songs across genres and across time frames that tell the stories of labor. And also just find that music in general intersects with our work lives in different ways. Songwriters have approached work as a topic in a variety of ways. For instance, they have written songs that simply tell the stories of different forms of labor or jobs. Some songs reflect the hazards and challenges of work and how labor has changed over time, sometimes for the good, sometimes with negative consequences. Songs have also been used by workers to protest working conditions, to encourage union participation, and to build support for the working class. And then also songs have been used in the past to make work easier, but also today that there's a very modern concept about how music is used to help boost productivity or keep us motivated or in the zone as we work. And these days, a lot of that is actually fairly research driven. There's a lot of people out there who are sort of looking into how that works. One thing I will mention, and it seems to be the songs that everyone remembers when we say that we're going to talk about music and work, is Disney, because they are particularly good at romanticizing the concept of work, even when they're pairing it with sometimes difficult work situations like Cinderella. But I'm thinking of like Hey Ho and Whistle While You Work from Snow White, and of course the work song, sung by the mice as they make the dress for Cinderella, but just that sort of romanticization of work and music, I thought would be a nice start for our talk. I'm just going to give you a quick idea of what to expect over the next hour. What we're doing is we're splitting it up between the 3 of us, and we're going to explore different aspects of work and music. And we're sort of focusing in both on the museum's content and the sort of wider context of hillbilly music, but we're also looking at different genres, different contexts, and certainly across the time frame. Erica is going to talk to us first about some of the different types of work that are most often reflected in songs, especially in those older 1920s, 30s, 40s songs. And she's also going to do a particular focus on a type of song within that genre, which is the work disaster song. And there are a lot of those. It's quite a common topic. I'll then be talking to you about how songs are what we are calling workers' anthems, both to talk about the difficulties and the challenges that workers face, but also how they're using them in those political and social justice and sort of union type contexts. And then Scotty at the end is going to give us some insight into the ways that music helps us to work better, along with ways that music is consumed subconsciously, because it sort of goes hand in hand with that, and it affects our mood and affects other things, which plays into our day-to-day lives. And he's also, just briefly, because most of the exhibit doesn't really talk about the music industry, but there's a huge amount of labor and work that's going on in the music industry every day. So he's going to take a quick look at what some of those jobs are. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Erica Barker. So enjoy.
All right. And I think Scotty is going to run our PowerPoint for us. So I'll give it just a moment for him to get that up on the screen.
I thought you were doing that. Just kidding.
I was going to say, don't tell me that right now. But while he's setting up that PowerPoint, I'll just start with sort of a brief introduction to my section, which, as Renee mentioned, there are hundreds of different types of work reflected in the exhibit. So for the purposes of this talk, I sort of narrowed it down to the four main industries in this region at the turn of the century, which are farming, lumber, mining, and the railroads. So at the start of the 20th century, almost half of all Americans still lived on farms. So farm work and the rural lifestyle was a major part of their lives. Corn and tobacco were the most common crops in this area. But farming for subsistence or farming for profit were very difficult and uncertain work to do, because a lot of times you were reliant on the environment and things beyond your control. But because so many people lived on farms, even if they weren't working on the farms, it found its way into a lot of songs. Ernest Stoneman's All I Got's Gone reflects on the Great Depression and how a lot of people in the area had to sell their farms or chose to sell their farms before the Depression hit to try to make it big. And then the stock market crashed and they had to either go back to farming or find some other way to support themselves. And then there's still songs today that are about farming and inspired by farming. Songs like International Harvester by Craig Morgan, where he talks about being a third generation farmer and all of the glories of the traditions of farming, as well as the modern inconveniences of having to drive his tractor 5 miles an hour down a highway. And songs like She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy by Kenny Chesney, which is a sort of funny, romanticized song about how his partner thinks it's attractive to watch him labor in the field and drive his tractor around. You can do the next slide, Scotty. So lumber was another major industry in this area from about 1880 to 1920. The abundance of trees here and the low cost of land, as I just mentioned, a lot of farmers were selling their land at this time. So logging companies bought that up. And that had a huge, devastating environmental effect on the region, but it also provided a lot of jobs. And so a lot of people would go and temporarily work at the lumber mills or the logging camps. And some songs that represent that are The Timberman by Johnny Cash, where he talks about sort of the pride that they would have had in their work. But then there's also songs like The Logging Song by Bill Staines, where he talks about the long, hard work day of the logger. Next slide, Scotty. Mining is probably one of the ones still remembered and romanticized here today a lot. Coal mining sustained Appalachian communities for over a century, and it's starting to decline now with the prevalence of more natural resources and energy sources. But for a long time, that was one of the major industries here. And so coal fields and living in coal towns provided a huge source of inspiration for a lot of musicians. Coal towns or company towns were places where the company owned everything. The housing, the businesses, the churches, the schools, everything was run by the company. And this was supposed to be something that they were providing for their workers to make it easier for them to live and work near the mines. But in a lot of cases, it ended up being a pretty bad place to live. The workers were often exploited by the company, and health was generally pretty bad too because of the coal dust in the air. So black lung disease was a major problem here. And I'm going to play a short clip from our Bristol's own Tennessee Ernie Ford, who made the song 16 Tons famous, where he talks about what it was like living in a company town.
You load sick, Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. I was born one morning when the sun didn't shine. I picked up my shovel and I walked to the mine. I loaded 16 tons of number 9 coal, and the straw boss said, well, to bless my soul, you load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
That's enough of that. Thank you, Scotty. We'll go back to the PowerPoint, and you can go ahead and move to the next slide once you get the PowerPoint back up. There we go. So because of the logging and mining industries, those were able to succeed because the railroads, so they sort of sustained, it was they all worked together to provide jobs. But the railroads were actually the largest industry in the United States at the start of the 20th century. So that was more than just in Appalachia. We were expanding west and things like that as well. So train songs are very, very popular in this time period. And there are songs about a variety of subjects related to the trains, everything from railroad construction songs like John Henry, which is about sort of the conflict between man and machine at the start of the Industrial Revolution. John Henry is a American folk hero. It was based on a real person, and you can actually visit the tunnel that he supposedly worked at. It's a national park site, and that's what that image in the PowerPoint is a statue erected in his honor there. There are also songs about train wrecks, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a little bit. Specific trains like the old 97, engine 143. There are songs about traveling on trains and just waiting for trains, like Jimmy Rogers, who was actually known as the singing brakeman, because before he decided to pursue music as his career, he worked for the trains himself. Next slide, Scotty. Oh wait, no, I was going to do a song there too. So you play another thing I wanted to talk about here. So John Henry is a ballad and has been recorded by many, many artists. The version I'm going to have Scotty play in just a second here is by Johnny Cash. But I wanted to kind of show how the sound of trains is represented in a lot of music as well. This is often done with the harmonica, although that's not what Johnny Cash uses in the clip that we're about to play. But trains, and in a lot of train songs, you can really almost hear the train itself in the song. So if you'll play that for me real quick, Scotty.
John Henry's pappy woke him up one midnight. He said, before the sheriff comes, I want to tell you, listen, boy. Said, learn to ball a jack, learn to lay a track, learn to pick and shovel too, and take my hammer, it'll do anything you tell it to. John Henry's mammy had about a dozen babies. John Henry's pappy broke till about a dozen times. The babies all got sick, and when the doctor wanted money, he said, I'll pay you a quarter at a time, starting tomorrow. That's a pay for a steel driver on this line. Then the section foreman said, hey, hammer swinger, I see you brought your own hammer, boy, but what else can all them muscles do? And he said, I can turn a jack, I can lay a trap, I can pick.
Thank you, Scotty. But as you can hear at the beginning of that song, it really almost sounds like you're working with John Henry at the beginning. The next slide, Scotty. And so I know I said I was going to focus on those 4 industries, but I wanted to just give a quick nod to a couple of other types of work that are often reflected in music, and that's sailing and soldiers. So these are a few of some of my favorite sailing and soldier songs. Traveling Soldier by the Dixie Chicks, which is about someone who gets drafted. Anyway, all right, so we'll move into disaster songs. So a disaster song is a song that tells a story about a major event, often national, international, and even local or regional. But they're usually written around the time of the tragedy, although many have been written after the fact. And all 3 of these industries, mining, lumber, and trains, were particularly difficult jobs, and so a lot of disasters occurred. There were a lot of deaths in all of those industries. With logging, if you want to go to the next slide, Scotty. Thank you. So a couple examples of logging disaster songs are Jimmy Whalen, which is another ballad that's based on the story of a lumberman named James Whalen who fell off of a log and was pulled under a jam by the current. The song is told from the perspective of his lover, who's walking along the side of the river where he died and sees his ghost. And then there's also The Frozen Logger, which is again by Johnny Cash. And that song talks about how a waitress identifies a logger because he's stirring his coffee with his thumb, and only a logger would do that. And then she talks about how her previous lover was also a logger and he died and froze in the river. Mining songs, if you'll skip to the next slide, Scotty. So mining disasters are another popular song topic. Miners spent long hours in complete darkness, pushing heavy carts, wading through water, wielding heavy equipment, and working with explosives. So there are a lot of dangers that come along with that. So some songs explaining that are The Explosion of the Fairmount Mines by Blind Alfred Reed. And this song was actually recorded here in Bristol at the Bristol Sessions as well. Oh wait, no, that's the next one. Sorry, getting my songs mixed up. But The Explosion of the Fairmount Mines is about a mine explosion in 1907 by the Fairmount Coal Company in Montgomery, West Virginia. And it's considered to be one of the worst mining disasters in American history, with about 350 people died. There was a mysterious explosion in 2 sections of the mine that collapsed the entrance and also to damaged the ventilation system. So most of the miners probably died in the explosion. The coal dust is highly flammable, so there would have been huge flames from that explosion. And then anyone who survived that probably died by suffocation or poisoning from the gases in the mines. This song is actually a revision of an earlier mining song called Dream of the Miner's Child, which is an older ballad about a child who has a dream of their parent dying in the mine and asks her dad not to go to work, or his dad not to go to work. Another mining disaster song is Big Bad John by Jimmy Dean in 1961. And this one is about a miner named John who was a very big, intimidating guy, and people were kind of scared of him. But then when the mine begins to collapse, he actually ends up saving 20 of his colleagues when the mine collapses on them. Next slide, Scotty. Train wrecks. So railway disasters. This is the one that was recorded at the 1927 Bristol Sessions. Sorry about that. But train disasters are probably some of the most popular songs of disaster songs anyway of this period. And some of them talk about the passengers who lost their lives, but most of them actually tend to be a sort of memorialization of the crewmen who were killed in the line of duty, rather than being an account of major passenger deaths. Some of the songs that talk about 1 or 2 crewmen dying actually ended up having a much longer life than songs that talked about many, many passengers dying. But from about 1882 to 1912, 48% of fatalities on railroads were caused by accidents. Trains were becoming longer and heavier and faster and were getting more difficult to control. In 1870, a train moved at about 30 miles per hour. And in 1890, they were moving more like 60 miles an hour. And the brakes and the technology just didn't quite keep up with that. So this song, The Wreck of the Virginian, is about a train wreck that happened near here. And I'm actually going to play another clip of this song. We'll do that before I get into the story of it. If you'll play that for me, Scotty. Thank you.
Come all you brave bull railroad men and listen while I tell the fate of easy or rich or good men we all loved well. This man was running on a road known as Virginian Line. He was a faithful engineer and pulled his train on time.
So this song is about a train crash, a head-on collision of two trains near Ingleside, West Virginia in 1927. The engineer and the fireman were both scalded to death and died, and about 20 passengers were injured. But the success of Reed's telling of the story and the song that he wrote about it actually put him on Ralph Peer's radar, which is what got him invited to Bristol to record the song. And it was one of the more successful ones to come out of that session as well. Next slide, please. So a couple of other train songs that I'd like to talk about real quick are the Engine 143, which was made popular by the Carter family, although this is another one that there are several versions of the song out there. And this song is about actually it's about an Engine 134 that was moving, it was a C&O railroad line, and the engineer, they came around a corner and there was a boulder, and so they weren't able to slow down in time. And the engineer died, although he's slowed the train down enough that no one else was injured, which is pretty lucky. It's interesting, though, in this song, they actually sort of make it sound like he was speeding intentionally and rushing, but there's no real proof of that in the actual story, and he's sort of seen as a hero at the time for slowing it down as much as he did so that nobody else got hurt. The Wreck of the Old 97 is another popular song. Henry Witter did a version of this in 1923. He's another one of the Bristol Sessions artists. But this song is about a train wreck in 1903. The number 7 plunged off of the Stillhouse Trestle Bridge near Danville, Virginia, and 11 people died. And so this one is interesting too, because it's actually one of the oldest music copyright disputes in America as well over who wrote the original song. And it ended up, I think, going to court for about 40 years before they finally settled all of that. And then the Newmarket Wreck is another Bristol Sessions song by Mr. and Mrs. J.W. Baker. And this one is about a wreck in 1904 that happened near Newmarket, Tennessee. But due to a railroad switching error, reports vary, but it's estimated between about 50 and 80 people died. It's one of the worst train disasters in Tennessee history. Interestingly, the greatest train wreck in Tennessee history, I believe, is the Great Train Wreck of 1918, which is also the most deadly, one of the most deadly in American history, and 101 people died in that disaster. And it's also a song called The Great Nashville Railroad Disaster, a true story, which was recorded by David Allen Coe in 1980. And then I'll turn it over to Renee to talk about Union songs and anthems.
Thank you, Erica. That was great. And there's so many, railway disaster songs, I think, are the most popular types of songs that we see in hillbilly music. You just see so many of them, besides obviously sacred and gospel music. So I'm sort of calling my section Workers' Anthems. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'm exploring them from sort of two aspects. One is sort of songs that tell us about the everyday struggles that workers are facing in their life or through their labor, or how those lyrics are sort of highlighting inequities and injustices that are faced by workers. I'm just going to wait till we get back to, yes. And songs that are, and then the second aspect is songs that are used by workers and activists in political or social justice settings to protest against working conditions and or difficult and challenging working conditions and other aspects of the labor workforce. there's different types of things reflected in these songs and these workers' anthems. Sometimes it's just the everyday stuff that you're facing on a daily basis that just you feel like aren't fair or reflecting those indignities and inequities. And this is a great example. It's called Sadie's Servant Room Blues. It's recorded by Hattie Burleson in 1928. I've got the first verse of the song is here. Mrs. Jarvis don't pay me much. They give me just what they think I'm worth. I'm going to change my mind. Yes, change my mind because I keep the servant room blues all the time. And this song basically, as it goes on, it's talking about the work, the long hours, the long, hard hours that are being worked for very low pay, but also it's about the difficulty of being an African-American domestic worker because there's also the issue of race that comes into the way you were treated in those homes. And so just being treated differently because you were an African-American worker as opposed to a white worker, and that's also reflected in some of the lyrics. So this is just a great example of just showing just the everyday difficulties of the job within the verse of this song. Scotty, next slide, please. Now, this next one, everybody is going to be familiar with 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton, released in 1980. At the same time, obviously, she wrote it for the movie 9 to 5. And both the song and the movie were inspired by the women's activist movement called 9 to 5, actually called that. This was founded in 1973. It later became known as the National Association of Working Women, and they fought for equal pay and treatment in the workplace. Karen Nussbaum, who is one of 9 to 5's co-founders, looking at this song, had some observations about how she thought that Dolly really sort of captured several aspects of women's working experience. One was the pride, at the beginning when she's pouring herself a cup of ambition, the grievances or the inequities, barely getting by, so not getting paid enough, the aspects of class conflict that could come into different roles within the same company. So you're just a step on the boss man's ladder. And then also the idea of collective power, the fact that everyone was in the same boat. So you're in the same boat with a lot of your friends, which actually means that you have a lot of people who are dealing with the same issues. And maybe if you get together, you can do something about it. We're going to play a quick clip. So Scotty, if you don't mind to play that clip for us now.
Tumble out of bed and I stumble to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of ambition and yawn and stretch and try to come to life. Jump in the shower and the blood starts pumping. Out on the streets the traffic starts jumping with folks like me on the job from 9 to 5.
The other cool thing about that song is that later in the song you hear a bit more clearly what sounds like a typewriter in the background, but that was actually Dolly Parton using her long fingernails to tap on the wood or something nearby to make that sound to the beat of the typewriter. So that's pretty cool. Next slide, please. So another type of workers' anthems that's sort of going along with the same idea of the two songs is just the continuous grindstone of work. So not necessarily any particular thing that's gotten you that you're finding difficult at your work, but just the day-to-day of going to work every day. Working Man's Blues by Merle Haggard from 1969. That's a good example. In that first verse, or in one of the verses, he's talking about he's doing the job to pay for his 9 kids and a wife, and he's having to just keep working every single day because he's got to support his family. And at the end of the day, he sometimes has a beer and sings a little bit of the Working Man Blues. Another song that does this, but someone's sort of rebelling against it, is Take This Job and Shove It by Johnny Paycheck from 1977. This is telling the story of a man who's gotten fed up with that day-to-day of just going to work. He's been doing it for years and years with little rewards, and he's decided to walk away from the job. Plus, because it's a country song, he's also been left by his girlfriend and wife to just make it a little bit more sad and lonely. So we'll play a few, about 30 seconds of this song next. Thanks, Scotty.
Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. The woman done left, took on only reason I was working for. You better not try to stand in my way as I'm walking out the door. Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more.
So next slide, please. The other thing that I wanted to think about and it's not per se a workers' anthems, but it's also just a kind of work that we might not think of immediately when we're thinking of these types of songs, and that is the work that's done by incarcerated people. And this is especially true when you think about the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and beyond. But those years in particular where there was a lot of hard manual labor that was being done within the prison system. Smithsonian Folkways has an album devoted to field recordings that were done in the 1950s by Dr. Harold Oster in the Louisiana State Penitentiary System. Several of those songs were recordings of the types of songs that those inmates would have been singing together in cadence in order to sort of both spur them on through that hard physical labor, but also to all stay within the same sort of rhythm, because that was important. We have an example of one of these recorded by Alan Lomax, so not from this same set of recordings, and it's called It Makes a Long-Time Man Feel Bad, and you can hear the sort of hammers and the work going on.
It makes a long-time man be a man. It makes a long-time man be a man. It makes a long-time man be a man. Oh, my Lord.
So these types of songs sort of reflect the harsh reality of Southern justice in the Jim Crow era. And a lot of later artists also wrote about this. So for instance, Sam Cooke's Chain Gang from 1960. Next slide, please, Scotty. And that was based on his experience of actually seeing and hearing a chain gang at work while he was on tour. And sort of the chorus is talking about what he's heard, but then the outro and some of the verses around it are sort of replicating that sound that we just heard in the previous recording. Next slide, please. Another one is just talking about the difficulties of not being able to find work, but also the hazards that you might face at work, and just the things that are reflecting that you're not getting what you deserve from the work. Blind Alfred Reed, 1927 Bristol Sessions artist. This is not a song he recorded here. He actually recorded this one in 1929, but he recorded here in 1927. His song, How Can a Poor Man Stand Such Times and Live, is a great example of this. Right at the very start of the stock market crash and the Great Depression, where poor families are finding it really difficult to find work. Therefore, they're finding it difficult to feed their families, to get sort of the basic day-to-day needs that they have, but also then the people who are offering them help. In this case, it's like the school or the preacher or the politician. They're not really giving any tangible help. And this is viewed as a really early example of a protest song, and it entered the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2020, which was cool. And a similar sentiment, this time for someone who is working, is expressed in Bessie Smith's 1928 Poor Man's Blues, where in one line she declares to the fictitious Mr. Rich that the working man's wife is starving, but your wife is living like a queen. And just that contrast between the different haves and have-nots. Next slide, please. But the hazards in particular, Erica mentioned Black Lung earlier. Singers like Hazel Dickens, she is very well known for her coal mining songs in particular, but a lot of social activism, social justice, union strike support. But this song in particular was composed to honor her brother, who was a coal miner who died of black lung disease. And the lyrics paint a really haunting picture of the disease's effects. Black lung, your hands icy cold as you reach for my life and you torture my soul. Cold as that water hole down in that cave where I spent my life's blood digging my own grave. And let's listen to just another verse of this. This one's a little bit later in the song.
So Renee, is it later in the song? Because I've got just to play the first 32 seconds.
Yeah. The verse that I just wrote was later in the song.
Okay, cool. Gotcha.
Yeah.
He's had more hard luck than most men could stand. The mines was his first love, but never his friend. He's lived a hard life, and hard he'll die. Black lungs done got him, his time is nigh.
It's a pretty haunting rendition, and especially, it's about her brother, like I said, but just the slow and difficult death that brings to those miners, and one of the things that they faced. Next slide, please. Hazel Dickens is a really great transition point for us to now talk about the songs that are used much more in a politicized way. And this is, in the mid-1930s, laborers, they were beginning to really concentrate on organizing into unions. They were fighting for fair wages and better working conditions. There was a lot of gatherings for protests, rallies. They were also, just doing whatever they could to sort of draw attention to what they saw as unequal distribution of wealth within the United States, dangerous working conditions. And this was a time that there was a lot of protest and movement towards that, which did actually positively affect the working world slowly but surely. But what I think is really cool about it is that a lot of these groups were coming together to educate and train activists so that when they were going out there on those on the picket lines or that kind of thing, they actually had a plan. And one of the places that they did some of that training was right here in Tennessee at the Highlander Center. And not here in Bristol, but further towards Middle Tennessee. But at the Highlander Center, it was also a well-known training ground for civil rights activists. But laborers, union activists, union leaders, they came to the Highlander to learn political theory, to learn about grassroots organization techniques, how to get support, but they also learned songs. And they then brought those songs back with them to the picket lines, to the labor rallies, to their meetings. Just one as a way to express the things that they were trying to change about their work and the workplace that they were living in, but also motivation and inspiration. So ways to, keep going when it's really hard, because some of these clashes between employers and workers were quite violent. People did die on both sides. There was a lot of things that were happening that were unfair and underhand. And so, these songs sort of helped them to deal with those difficulties. Stay here, because the first one I wanted to talk about is a man called Joe Hill. There are loads of songs that have been part of workers' movements used during those union strikes or clash, or like that describe these kind of clashes. But the Joe Hill story, I think, is particularly interesting. He was a Swedish immigrant, a labor activist. He was living in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He moved here with his brother from Sweden. And what's interesting to me about him is not only was he a labor activist himself, but he wrote numerous workers' protest songs, and then later has become a subject of some very famous workers' protest songs, several versions of the same sort of song. He was a member of the Industrial Workers of the World, which was a revolutionary union. They were aiming for better working conditions, but also wanted to see an end to capitalism. And he wrote some labor-focused songs. So, for instance, he wrote Casey Jones, The Union Scab, which I think is particularly interesting. If we think back to what Erica was talking about with the disaster songs, the ballad of Casey Jones that most of us are familiar with is about the heroic engineer of a train who, died in a train wreck again. But this is a new version where Joe Hill was looking at Casey Jones as someone who opposed the railroad strike, crossed the picket line, and stayed loyal to the employers instead of the other workers around him. And so he's a union scab. Another one called Where the Fraser River Flows was used to encourage union participation. The Tramp was a song about the plight of migrant workers. So he sort of looked at all sorts of different sort of issues within the labor movement. And then in 1915, he was actually executed after standing trial for basically a trumped up murder charge that there was ample evidence he was not guilty of. And so after his death in 1915, in 1936, there was a poem that had been written soon after his death, and it was called I Dreamed I Saw Joe Hill Again. And this was turned into a song and published for the first time in the Daily Worker magazine. And since then, songs about Joe Hill have been taken up by various activists. For instance, Woody Guthrie composed his own song about Joe Hill and his trial in 1947. Paul Robeson sang an altered version of the original song to various audiences throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s. Pete Seeger recorded his own version of Joe Hill several times. And one of the most famous singers of Joe Hill has been Joan Baez. She sang it at Woodstock in 1969. She's recorded and sung it numerous times since then, but she also then brought it back to the fore in 2011 in the Occupy Wall Street protests. And we're going to listen to a little bit of this, the second verse, starting at 35 seconds. Scotty, please.
So you said, which side are you on, correct?
No.
Yeah, okay.
So Joan Baez from 35 seconds to like 1 minute and 5. So it's about a 30-second clip from 35 seconds.
Yeah, I gotcha. Where'd it go? I just saw it.
The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die. Standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think what's interesting again is that he's said to have said, when he knew he was going to be executed for this crime, which he chose to do by firing squad, not to mourn for him, just to organize. That was all. That's what he wanted the people who were supporting him to do. So next slide, please. But I think one of the other interesting things that we see within these protest songs is that there's a lot of female songwriters and performers who were very active in these movements, very active, especially within coal mining movements for striking and supporting striking coal miners and being part of those protest movements. And one of the early examples of this is Florence Reese, sort of the grandmother of all these women who have gone on to really try and stand up for what they believed in. With her song, Which Side Are You On? And we'll play a clip for that really quickly, and then I'll tell a little bit of the story. So just about 20 seconds of the first verse, Scotty.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? We're starting our good battle, we know we're sure to win.
What's interesting about that song is that as it goes on, that which side are you on? Are you on the union side? Or are you on the company side? But it's calling out by name some of the people that were causing problems for the union workers. And when Florence wrote this song, it was in 1931. This is probably one of the best known union organizing songs in American music history. She wrote it in 1931 in a fit of, probably in a fit of fear, anger, and despair. Her house had just been entered by a bunch of armed thugs from the coal company. They had threatened her. They'd threatened her children. They'd torn the house apart and made a huge mess and broken things because they were searching for her husband, who was a union organizer who had gone into hiding right before that. So she just immediately wrote this song after that incident happened. And it's become so famous, and it's traveled across the world as a rallying cry for people within the working class and workers, and is still pretty famous and is a really interesting story. Next slide, please. Just wanted to mention Hazel Dickens one last time, just because, like I said, she has been so prevalent in this type of work and these type of songs. For instance, in the award-winning film Harlan County, USA, which is about the clash between the company and the union workers in Harlan County, Kentucky, 7 of the songs out of 22 on that soundtrack are Hazel Dickens songs. For instance, They'll Never Keep Us Down, which I've included some of the lyrics there, and the Yablonsky murder, which was written right after a family, father, mother, and daughter were murdered. And he was a union leader, and they were murdered at the very big end of 1969, and she wrote this song in 1970. Next slide, please. Other people who've sang these type of songs, Woody Guthrie, I mean, a lot of his music is protest music. The 1913 massacre he did in 1941. It was about the deaths of copper miners and their families at a social event, and it was believed that it had been caused by a union busting person sort of playing a prank that caused a disaster at the social event. And later artists have taken their political stances and their support for the unions and working classes onto the performance stage since then. We've got Judy Collins. If you go to the next slide, please, Scotty. Bread and Roses from 1976. That was about the garment workers' strike. In 1912, Billy Bragg's There is Power in a Union. This title is based on a 1913 Joe Hill song, but it has different words, same sentiment. Blue Highways, Union Man from 2001, The White Stripes, The Union Forever, also from 2001. And let's just listen for our last clip to that Billy Bragg song for about 30 or 40 seconds, Scotty.
Together we don't stand. There is power in our union.
And then last slide, because this concept of singing as protest has come full circle to pop culture and The Simpsons. For the episode, they have the plant, but we have the power, where there's a scene where the picket line in front of the power plant in Springfield, with the workers out there protesting, and Lisa to the side, Lisa Simpson, singing her song, the power plant strike song, in the vein of Hazel Dickens, Florence Reese, and all of those wonderful singers who have sang these songs. So I am now going to hand over to Scotty, and he will move on to something a bit more modern.
All right. So good job, Renee. That was very interesting. I'm glad that we didn't go over everything, so I can enjoy your all's presentations the same as everyone else is. So let me get the PowerPoint back up here. So my section is a bit different. It's a little bit abstract and tangential in parts, just because it's a concept that I kind of thought of. I've thought of it before, but when we first started working on research for this program, it popped in my head. But it's how music, is surrounded in our everyday lives at this point, more so than ever in history. Everything from, people try to get motivated to work out, or when you wake up in the morning, you want to listen to music. Live sporting events, there are very popular motivational songs there, and all over the place. But for myself, work is a big a big factor if I'm working on something alone. It helps me concentrate a lot to listen to music. And my playlist is a bit different, so I'm actually not playing anything from it. I thought we were going to stick with 10 to 12 songs, but Erica and Renee's playlists are quite a bit larger than mine, so I may add to mine, but I will share those links again. But first, we'll talk about work songs, and how they were originally developed. The first examples I have are unfortunately not the most positive connotation, as they were sang by enslaved peoples. African American work songs are originally developed in the era of slavery. And it was because that was almost an entirely oral culture. Those songs were used to, lift spirits in some instances, or even to communicate news. Like a lot of songs, were news stories, but it was a way for enslaved peoples to communicate with their communities and families without the powers that be knowing. And a lot of times it was a way to withstand hardship, express anger and frustration through creativity, in a covert way. And there are also coded songs. So the one song example that I did pick for this was Follow the Drinking Gourd, just because it has a really cool story. It's an American folk song, first published in 1928. And it was supposedly used by an Underground Railroad operative to encode escape instructions to Canada, like as a map. So it was instructions to directions to the north from Mobile, Alabama, to the Ohio River, which took them to freedom. So taken at face value, the drinking gourd refers to, a gourd that you would, like a dipper that you would drink water from. But as the code name, it's code name for the constellation, the Big Dipper, which points to Polaris, the North Star, and or the Pole Star, and going north. There's a version of Richie Havens doing this song in my playlist. That is a cool version there. But so those were the first working songs that really came up within this research. Then I went back and I tried to look for specific examples of productivity and work, and I discovered that from 1940 to 1967, the government actually commissioned a show to be on BBC radio, which was called Music While You Work. And they commissioned a guy to host it. His name was Winford Reynolds. He was the organizer. And it started on October 19th, 1943 at 10:30. And it broadcast twice daily. So I'll go ahead. I've actually got a short YouTube clip that I'm going to play a bit of. This isn't that broadcast, but it is the first band that was broadcast on the show.
While you work is played this morning by Troyes and his bandolier.
So that's a sample of the kind of music you would have heard on the program. And, it was a hit. Such a hit, it wants to keep playing. But yeah, it was a hit, and, it played for a long time. I'm not really sure why it stopped. I didn't get to that part. But yeah, let's see. And it was also, as World War II was in full swing. So the BBC decided they need to get involved to up productivity. And another fun thing that I learned about this was, and I put this song on the playlist as well, is that the government or the BBC, created rules and regulations. And in this case, one of the songs that they couldn't play was Deep in the Heart of Texas, because they didn't want to risk the employees doing the flat part and taking their hands off of their work and causing injuries or things like that. So, and there was some actual, data, and I have an infographic. I'm not sure how it's going to look because it's the craziest. It's one of those super long photos, but well, I don't see it now. I'll post a link to where I got this information, but so studies show that, employees that listen to music at work increase happiness and productivity. 88% of workers report greater accuracy when listening to music. Overall, 90% of workers perform better when listening to music. 40% of business owners believe playing background music increases sales. And a worker's health benefits by listening to music. It reduces stress and anxiety, increases motivation and memory, and improves immune function. And that was taken from the Telegraph, article on the Telegraph from the UK. And it makes us feel better, so I don't know if anyone's heard of the Mozart effect. So that's when you play a genius such as Mozart for, usually for babies, I think is the case, but anyone, I guess, and it can help turn you into a genius as well. And then there was the activation theory that was thought up in the 60s amid concern that people struggling to remain productive in dull jobs, such as assembly line work in factories for long periods of time, it provides mental arousal to be able to function effectively. And then, let's see, I feel like I had some other information and a quote from the Mayo Clinic. Not seeing. Okay, there it is. So, in biological terms, melodious sounds help encourage the release of dopamine in the reward area of the brain, same as eating a delicacy, looking at something appealing, or smelling a pleasant aroma. And that's a quote from Dr. Amit Sood, a physician of integrative medicine with the Mayo Clinic. People's minds tend to wander, and we know that a wandering mind is unhappy. Most of the time, we are focused on the imperfections of life, and music can bring us back to the present moment. So Dr. Sood also says that it takes about 15 minutes to a half hour of listening to regain concentration, and music without lyrics usually works best, he says, which I find true. I listen to a lot of instrumental stuff when I work, and I put some of that on my playlist, one of which I accidentally played a small clip of when I was trying to get Erica's first song there. So this is the tangent that I mentioned earlier on. So I didn't really think about Muzak. I never think about Muzak. I don't think anyone does because it's not awesome. But it was invented in 1934 and ended up becoming a huge industry. It's also commonly referred to as elevator music. And there's actually kind of a story, a misnomer with elevator music. A lot of people think that it was invented to help calm people's nerves as they rode elevators, in the early 20th century, around, I guess, the 1930s. But that's not true, because at that point, people had actually been using elevators for 80 or so years. And from what I read, the reason that elevator music started was really just to avoid awkward silences with people, who may not know each other. And there's some little facts there about Muzak, but I actually have a cool video that I want to share. This guy, I really like his sense of humor, and he explains it really well. So I'm going to play about 2 minutes of this video.
This is a story about the persuasive power of music and the effect it has on the collective unconscious. It's a story of war, of mind control, and of half-price sales at the Kmart. Welcome to Ordinary Things, where ordinary things are explained. Today's ordinary thing? Muzak, the soundtrack to mid-century elevators and prefrontal lobotomies. But what is Muzak? The genre known as Muzak is a style of instrumental background music, characterized by repetition and simple arrangements inspired by classical or popular songs. Also known as elevator music or piped music, it's designed to be played in commercial spaces with the expressed purpose of altering people's mood and behavior. So where did Muzak come from? Much like Xeroxing, jet skis and onesies, we know Muzak by the name of the company that created it. The Muzak Company was founded in 1922 by a man named George Square. Before inflicting soft jazz on the unsuspecting public, Square had an illustrious career with the world's biggest military and the Middle East's worst wedding crashers, the US Army. In World War I, he devised a way to transmit secret radio messages using living trees as antennae. After the war, he swapped trees for telephones, as the Muzak Company's first product was a device that sent music through telephone lines, charging customers monthly on their utility bill. But the service was soon eclipsed by developments in radio technology, and because who'd want to pay a monthly fee just to listen to music on their phone? So it wasn't until the 1940s that the Muzak Company found its true, irritating purpose. What you're hearing now is Paradise Program, recorded by Muzak's in-house orchestra. It's energetic but bland, motivational yet mundane. It's the kind of music that might inspire you to do your taxes or take the bins out. And it was also a fixture in Muzak's highly successful Stimulus Progression program. By 1936, Muzak was selling the idea that background music could substantially increase productivity in the workplace. They began producing packages of motivational music designed to be pumped into factories and offices. These recordings were organized into alternating 15-minute blocks of music and silence. 15 minutes of
So yeah, I wanted to get to the series,
progressively energetic music.
The Stimulus Progression, that was a huge thing for them. But I'd never really considered Muzak that much, and from hold music, which is something Erica actually brought up when I told her about my Muzak findings. To in elevators, in any office. A lot of places that you go, you're subjected to that. And it's typically in an office environment, I feel like, or in a retail environment. I've worked in retail before where, you were issued what they, wanted you to play. So going to the next part of my section, I thought that, we should mention music industry careers that aren't only musicians. Being an amateur musician for so many years, I learned a lot of skills that I've actually honed in my professional life. Everything from running sound, just about equipment, fixing equipment, promoting shows, booking shows, what not to drink so I get out of bed the next morning. But this is definitely not an expose on my past. So I just wanted to go through a few of those careers. So, you have production and recording, you have labels that pay to have music pressed for consumption for, retail. Agents and recruiters, there's marketing and public relations that go with all of that, research. There are producers who, get the best sounds and best performances they can out of musicians, and engineers that record everything. Then entertainment attorneys. Then you have merchandising, such as music store managers or owners and just employees, buyers for the larger stores that sell them. And those of you who don't know, vinyl is actually selling more at this point than it has since the late 80s, which, I've been collecting records since I was 16 and never stopped, but it's good to see things available again. Of course, there's web development, which would include social media. And then we have a radio station here, and we all of our DJs are volunteers. I actually host a show, and then I co-host Museum Talk with Renee and now Erica. Royalty analysts and accountants. I actually deal with royalties for our organization and do all of the reporting there, which entails a lot more than I ever knew before I started doing that. And then you've got the events part of it for live shows. You've got booking agents, tour managers, coordinators, publicists, stagehands and sound and lighting designers. There's actually a union for that work that I've known several people that have worked for that union, and it's called the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Moving Picture Technicians, Artists, and Allied Crafts of the United States, its territories, and Canada. And that's still going as far as I know. They represent over 150,000 members of their union and keep them working as far as I know. And then you've got wardrobe and makeup. And I guess that is the end of our presentation. So if anyone has any questions.
Well, Scotty, I'm going to jump in for just real quick to sort of tie it all together, and then we will be open to questions. And there's been a lot of chat going on. I've been enjoying the chat as I've been listening to your talk.
There's no chat until I was talking, and then I can't read.
Yeah. But so I hope that you all enjoyed the talk tonight. We were trying really hard to sort of look at it from various angles. This could have been a much longer talk. I certainly I overwent my time as usual. So I don't think Scotty and Eric are surprised by that. But there's so much out there with songs and music, and so much out there about how music is used to tell those stories. And I mean, that is one of the things that music has as its purpose, is to tell people's stories. And certainly for most of us, work is such a major part of our story. And throughout, as long as there's been recorded music, and before that, there have been songs about people's work, the good, the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, and all of that. And I just think it really shows the power of music on so many different levels, just as a way to express our lives, as a way to try and change our lives. And now I feel like the little bit of mind control after Scotty's part of it. And I'm a bit worried about all the music I listen to. So I'm going to start plugging my ears.
It's a weird thing. And Steve, thanks. I'm actually not as young as I look. So I can remember music very well. So, yeah.
But I think what's been great about this is it's given us a chance to look at both the context of the music that we talk about every day at the museum, the hillbilly and the early commercial country music, and that influence of that roots and old time music, but then look beyond it and just see how many different interconnected ties there are between the stories that we've told and the stories that have gotten told in other places and contexts and times. And I guess just be sure you're picking the right music when you're doing your work, because it could help or hinder you, it sounds like. I know that certainly when I'm doing anything with words, I can't listen to music with words. It has to be like classical or some kind of instrumental music, which I think is a pretty common thing. But
there were a couple of things that I found that I didn't include of people disputing, the effect of music on work. One was really just, if you look like you're immersed in music and wearing headphones, your manager may think you're not really working. And then I guess there is also, the possibility of overstimulation. They compared it to overstimulating a toddler. I guess you would just want to run out of your job and, go to a rock show or something. But
yeah. Well, and I think it probably depends on the person. It depends on the music. It depends on a million different things, I'm sure. But I just saw that Steve put in a pitch for ARSC, the Association for Recorded Sound Collections, which we're well familiar with. We are a member. We had hoped to be at a conference with them back in 2020 when everything changed. But yeah, that's a really great resource to learn more about the sound recordings that are out there and that have impact on our history.
If it's virtual for 2022, I may try to join that one. I've never been before. And as far as sound archiving and collections, you should go back and listen to last Thursday's museum talk if you haven't. We had a friend of ours who works for the Archives of Appalachia at ETSU, East Tennessee State University, and they do a lot of sound and moving image archiving.
And he actually did a clip of another woman singing a protest type song.
Yeah.
We have another comment from Craig Connell. It says, I can't read when there is music with words, but many software engineers listen to music while they code. It seems to create a rhythm and allows them to shut out the world. That worked for me too when I coded more. That makes sense. Yeah, I can see how certain music can sort of help you get into the rhythm of your work, for sure.
I'm the same way. I try to listen to stuff that I'm not going to get pulled into the lyrical content. So I like a lot of dub style reggae and just kind of ambient, I guess, electronic kind of stuff. If it's too busy, like jam band or prog rock or something, that just does the same. So yeah, and another thing we talked about that I didn't include because I didn't want to get in trouble with Marvel is like the scene in the Doctor Strange movie and how surgeons usually have a playlist. And Renee and I talked about that. A lot of surgeons have a specific playlist, so I guess they can concentrate on what they're doing.
And and there's a really great scene from Doctor Strange about that. You're right.
Yeah, where they kind of quiz it. It's like a running quiz show. So I really related to that part.
Let's see. We've got a couple more comments from Diana Conco. The three of you opened up so much information and inspiration for me. I want to listen to all of these songs, and you can, because we will be sharing these playlists, like we said.
Reminder that I'll actually share them again right now.
Yeah. And I think, there's a couple of suggestions that have come through in the chat that we could add to it too, Scotty, before we send it out with the survey. Yeah. But thank you, Diana. That's really nice. We really enjoyed doing this program. I mean, we love to do cool things to do with our new special exhibits. And this is a really great exhibit about the history of work. But it was so easy to tie it into our focus on music. And then we have another comment from Steve Rim. Please, the 2021 ARSC conference is online for members. There's a special public domain issue with CD coming in January. All pre-1923 recordings are now out of copyright on January 1st.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
I knew it was coming. That's really cool. So.
Oh, well, because the copyright thing is confusing even if you think you understand it, all of a sudden you don't. So that makes things a little bit simpler.
Yeah, and sound was recorded sound was one of the hardest to understand. So
yeah. Well, I didn't see someone, Scotty, if you don't mind to have a look to be sure I haven't missed any comments oh, here's another one I didn't see. Check out C. Kahn's Labor Songs. He's a modern Woody Guthrie. He's 75 now. So yeah, we'll find a couple of his songs and add them to the playlist. They could go well with some of the other protest and labor songs that we've been talking about. But I don't think I've missed any questions or comments.
The only thing that I can remember that you missed, well, one thing is that, and this is a good segue, is that Steve did mention that Muzak was also royalty free. And I've actually taken advantage of that. In training videos and things like that, you can always use just like a Muzak or a backing track and not have to worry about that. There was one comment early on. Let's see, where is it?
Well, I just saw one from Bill Beal, who's my friend up near the DC area, saying that whenever he hears or reads or thinks about labor protest songs, he immediately goes to that Simpsons episode. So that's awesome. But we've just gotten two more that have come through. Sheldon Timon says, music in the background got me through my BA and MA studying and term paper writing. Not sure how it works, but it did work. And then also Steve wanted to let everyone know that on the ARSC website, there are lots of free lectures. So those are definitely, if this has sort of piqued your interest, that's a good place to go next to find out some more.
Yeah, and the other thing was Steve had mentioned earlier a great labor activist folk songs that he recommends, the music of, I guess it's pronounced C. Kahn, and he's on Spotify or his website.
So before we end, we are going to end, but Erica at the end is going to just share some upcoming events with you all. But again, thank you so much for everyone for being here with us tonight, for giving us so much of your attention and time, and also for all your great comments. And we will definitely be sending that survey out, and we'd love your feedback. But Erica, if you want to just tell us a few of the things that are upcoming that people might be interested in, that would be great.
Sure. And we're only running about 20 minutes behind. That's pretty good for us.
Oh, no. We always go to about 8:30. We are fine.
Okay. Never mind then. I stand corrected. So upcoming events, our December Farm and Fun Time show is sold out, but you can still catch the show on Radio Bristol's Facebook page, streaming online. It airs this Thursday at December 9th at 7. And the show will feature Tim O'Brien Band and the Slocan Ramblers. You can still get tickets to the Radio Bristol Christmas, which is on Friday, December 17th at 7. And we'll be featuring Bill and the Bells, the Cody Norris Show, and Martha Spencer and Larry Sigmund. Also, the final Radio Bristol Book Club of the year will be on Thursday, December 23rd at 12. We'll be talking about Dolly Parton's Song Teller, My Life in Lyrics, followed by an interview with music journalist Robert K. Orman, who worked on the book with her. And also, of course, be sure to come and visit the Way We Worked exhibit. The Smithsonian exhibit will be here on display at the museum through January 23rd. And also keep an eye out on our website for upcoming virtual speaker series programs in 2022, the 2022 Radio Bristol Book Club list, which is on the website now, and also other programs. We always will post those on the website for future upcoming events that you might want to check out.
So yeah, thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed tonight. We certainly did. There'll be a blog post probably in about a couple of weeks sort of on this theme too. So keep an eye out for that. But thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. And I don't know if Bill has his hand raised or if he's saying bye.
I think he's clapping. He's clapping.
Clapping. Well, thank you very much. This was our first speaker series that we did in-house, and it was a lot of fun.
Yep. Everyone have a great night and hopefully a lovely holiday season.